climate refugees. This is probably a term that you've heard before and maybe you've even used it. But should we be using it? My name is Melissa Siegel. I'm a professor of migration studies, and this is a channel about all things migration. So let's talk about climate refugees. It's likely also that as the impacts of climate change intensify, we're probably going to start to see a rise in the number of media headlines talking about climate refugees. Now, while the term is often used with the best intentions, for instance, to raise awareness about the fact that climate change can have a devastating consequence for people living in vulnerable places, there might be also several good reasons why it's better to not use the term. In this video, we'll explain why. Now, I definitely want to give a special shout out to David Durand-Delacre and Kees Geest at the United Nations University EHS, who work in the environment and migration section, who were super helpful with this video. So thanks so much. Now, according to the 1951 Geneva Convention, which was established in the context of the aftermath of World War II and is the guiding international convention on how we define refugees legally, refugees are people who have fled war, violence, conflict, or persecution and have crossed an international border to find safety in another country. So, more specifically, a refugee is someone who is unable or unwilling to return to their country of origin owing to a well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion. So, strictly speaking, people who are forced to migrate for climate reasons do not fall under this more narrow definition of who a refugee is. So, why is it better to not use the term climate refugees? So, people who are forced to flee from climate-related risks or disasters actually tend to move within their own country and not cross country borders. So, most of the displacement because of disasters or environmental factors that we see are actually internally and not internationally. So people also tend to move for a variety of reasons, and we have definitely spoken about this in other videos on the channel. So if you're interested to know more about why people migrate in general, please do check out that video on the channel. And it's really difficult to prove that a person is forced to flee because of climate impacts or only climate impacts. So talking about climate refugees, especially with qualifiers like mass movements and millions or tsunamis of climate refugees, tends to have an adverse effect on the people who are forced to flee. So the reaction in potential destination countries is likely to be more xenophobic and results in higher barriers. So to quote Boas and colleagues, although the potential for climate change to disrupt livelihoods and threaten lives is real, these policies reinforce a false narrative that predicts large numbers of climate refugees. This self-referencing narrative in scientific literature and policy reports has the consequence of entrenching climate migration as a looming security crisis without empirical scientific basis. So basically, by using this terminology and kind of whipping up fear in this area, it can actually be counterproductive to the real plight of people that have to migrate for environmental reasons. So there's also concern amongst some migration scholars and practitioners that using the term waters down the meaning of refugee more generally and could put the official legal definition in jeopardy in the future, leaving people in need without the legal benefit of protection. So this is one of the other concerns around kind of using this term climate refugee. Now, we can also make a case for using the term climate refugee. So despite plenty of criticism on the term, it is still actually widely used, especially in the written press, but also amongst some academics. So some of this is because they argue in favor of an international convention based on the refugee model for this specific group. Others use it simply because it is a very catchy and emotive term. So journalists and filmmakers often use it because they typically assume it as a term that their audiences will grasp most readily. Now, others argue that unlike other terms, refugee actually places the emphasis on the duty to provide protection, something that can be lost with other terms, which of course is a noble goal in itself. There is also the issue that many of the alternative terms are also not without their own problems, right? So in the European context, at least, the word migrant has had a bit of a negative connotation, essentially corresponding to quote-unquote economic migrants, or those people who are considered undesirable or illegal or irregular, etc. So these terms also come with their own problems. If you also get more specialized or more technical into the terms, talking about maybe IDPs or internally displaced persons or those in exile or other terms, people might not know exactly what you mean or why you're actually using that word. So, just like with any topic, there are many words available to talk about the relationship between climate change and human mobility, and people disagree about their definitions and which ones are best to use in any context. So climate refugees is just one term, one option amongst many. So some use the term climate migrants or climate-induced displacement or climate mobilities. And you might even hear some terms like eco-refugees or clean migration or climate exiles. Some people really prefer to speak of the environment instead of climate as the driving factor. So this diversity of options is in some respect a problem of kind of just terminological proliferation, right? But preferred terminologies do vary by context and over time. And sometimes one term falls in favor and one term falls out of favor. So another common problem with climate migration terminology is its categorical emptiness. In some contexts, people use different terms interchangeably, as if they were synonyms, when they actually refer to slightly different things. So the solution to this problem is perhaps not to seek a consensual definition, which is of course almost impossible on a large scale, but for stakeholders to offer their own clarity by what they mean by a given term, and to try to be intentional and knowledgeable about the terms that you use. So there is one final thing to talk about here with regard to the term climate refugees. While we might like to see the same protection extended to this group, of course, to this group of people who have been displaced because of environmental factors or climate-related factors, it is widely recognized that it is currently politically impossible to have a sort of climate refugee status given with regard to the kind of same protections that we have for the current definition of refugees under the 1951 Convention. So why is it? Why does it seem so impossible to be able to have some kind of overarching agreement where we can give protections to these people who will most definitely be in need of it? Well, many stakeholders, especially NGOs and academics, worry that attempts to renegotiate the Geneva Convention and other existing protection mechanisms would be counterproductive. They argue that it's already hard enough to guarantee rights of asylum seekers as it is, and opening existing protections for debate would only risk creating opportunities for governments to further weaken them. So the priority is to preserve and strengthen the existing rights. So some people persist in making a hard law approach at the global level, like the Geneva Convention, by suggesting a new standalone convention. There is actually a pre-existing draft convention on the international status of environmentally displaced persons, but most experts are not very optimistic about its chances given the current political arena in this regard. However, most stakeholders, especially international organizations, focus on soft law and place their hopes on kind of regional and national initiatives to try to promote the protection of this specific group of people. So I guess I'll throw the question back to you guys. Should we be using the term climate refugees? Let me know down in the comments below your opinion on this issue. And of course, if you found this video useful, give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe to this channel so you don't miss any of the videos on different migration issues that we upload every week. And I definitely hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.